You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Welcome to the 602 Club, and what a feeling it is to be back. I'm just so excited to have with me two of my favorite maniacs. The first, Christy Morris. Christy, it's so good to have you back here after Star Wars Celebration.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be back. It's been a little while, but, definitely here dancing like a maniac.
Excellent, excellent. And always dancing like a maniac. And fresh off his appearance here with Top Gun, the one and only John Mills.
We know I'm not a dancer. I'm the comic. Y'all know that. I'm the guy getting up there telling the terrible jokes. That's my bag.
We'll catch you one day.
It's true. It is true, because they are terrible. So, yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
They make me laugh. That's all that matters.
Hey, man, they made Richie laugh, and that's all that mattered, too.
That is all that matters.
Well, we are going to be talking about, we decided in our Book of Boba Fett episode, because Jessica Biel is in that show, unfortunately deceased now, Twi'lek, Jessica Biel.
So far as we know.
The character, not Jessica.
Maybe she survived. We don't know.
Yeah.
But we decided we'd talk about Flashdance because John and I hadn't seen it. So we are going to be doing that this week here on the 602 Club. So buckle in. Before we get into the show, just want to say thank you to everybody who's listening. We really do appreciate that you spend time with us each and every week. If you are listening to the show and you're not subscribed, please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And then if you're on a podcast platform that allows you to rate or review us, please do that too. So Spotify allows you to rate podcasts. So that's a great place. And it's an excellent place actually to get podcasts. Their look and feel is so good. I mean, it's my favorite actually when it comes to that. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, you can give us not only a rating, but a written review. We'd really appreciate that because it does help people find the show there. So do all that for us. We really appreciate it. And of course, we'd love it if you would follow us on social media. So go over to Twitter and follow the 602 Club. And then we're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. You can also find the entire network online at Trek.fm, and of course we're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. There's also a listeners only discussion group where you can join listeners from all over the world and talk about all the different shows we're doing it. And again, you can find that there on Facebook. And last but not least, I do want to say thank you to everybody who supports the network through Patreon, because without listeners just like you, we wouldn't be able to make this network happen. It's been a rough few years, and so we'd really appreciate you going over to patreon.com/TrekFM and becoming part of our team. There's just no way with all the podcasts we're doing that we can do this without listeners just like you. So again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. Okay, so really interesting to me, this movie. And John, you and I hinted at this a little bit when we were talking about Top Gun Maverick, was the idea that this movie launches some of the biggest producers of the 80s and 90s.
Oh, yes.
And that is Simpson and Bruckheimer,
yep.
Who very influential and, of course, paved the way for movies like Footloose or Purple Rain or Top Gun. And so I was really interested in this idea of, like, if this doesn't hit, how many movies do we not get made possibly because this movie like becomes this kind of like cultural touchstone, which is so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood is an imitation machine, so undoubtedly it accelerates the process. I don't think if Flashdance doesn't happen, it's the MTV generation is coming up. This is inevitable in a large sense. And I think that Flashdance is just the one, like there's always one that just taps that coming wave, like just gets right there as the wave is rising. And, you know, has to do it well, has to know what it's doing in terms of editing things together. And I think probably what it does is because it's just the fact that it is such a monster hit. I think it has an influence no matter what when it comes out. Like let's just say Flashdance comes out, but it's not the number 3 box office hit of the entire year, which is still mind blowing when you think about it. Mm-hmm. This is the year that Return of the Jedi came out. So it was the ranking, I believe, is Return of the Jedi, the Oscar-winning Terms of Endearment, which, like, Return of the Jedi had, you know, $300-something million. Terms of Endearment was number 2 at $100 million. So keep in mind that disparity right there. But then Flashdance is right on its tail. And that's, you know, I think that just kicks it into overdrive. It just becomes suddenly you mentioned Footloose, and obviously that's still in my brain, and Top Gun, but Rocky IV goes down this road. You know, like, and it is, this is that super montage music video marketable entity where at the end of it, it doesn't matter whether the movie's good anymore. It just matters whether it entertains. Like it's that pulse of information that gets put out there with the right soundtrack, and boom, you got a hit. So movies become a lot cheaper to make in that circumstance too.
Yeah, well, and I mean, and speaking of Footloose, I mean, think about the whole montage of feet at the beginning. Mm-hmm. Definitely, they're all related, and this is kind of just one step in the stepping stones of all the other similar films that then come after it. But I mean, I do think that it's a combination of striking while the iron is hot. MTV had just started in 81, and then this came in 83, so it's already great timing wise with that. But then being a little bit more like a music video itself with the way it was edited and the focus more on the dance than anything else. I think that also really helped it get the notoriety that it does.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like this movie could start with an MTV production. You know, because it really does have that feel of a music video, which makes sense because the director, Adrian Lane, was actually that was what he was. He was a commercial director, basically. Mm-hmm. And so a lot like Tony Scott directing Top Gun, you get this kind of like commercial almost for different types of 80s dance. And I was really interested, John, and I know you're more familiar, especially with the directors of that time period, even than I am. But like David Cronenberg turned this down, and so did Brian De Palma.
Okay,
what kind of movie would this been if either of them had directed?
It would have been a horror show if either one of them had directed it. Brian De Palma with a female-led film about, that horrifies me. And David Body Horror Cronenberg with Flashdance. I mean, no, thank you. Very much. Thank you for going with Adrian Lyne. I'm happy with that. That's fine. And Lyne is not a director that really, I think, is as well, like his legacy hasn't held up quite the same way that I think people thought it would have. But no, Cronenberg with Flashdance? That hurts my head to think what that would be like. I mean, this is not taking anything away from these guys, but like De Palma, in the hands of De Palma, this becomes a little bit, I can't think of the exact word for it, but less comfortable.
I feel like Lyne brings a very really kind of dark and moody, and I think a lot more serious right? Like I feel like it would be a much more serious take, whereas this movie I think is so lighthearted. Like everywhere we are in this movie is like seedy and terrible, and yet somehow, you know, it doesn't feel like that at all. This feels like this, you know, I don't know, like kids version. Like
a little more of a comedy or a lighter look at the situation.
I mean, it takes everything more lighthearted, even though I mean, they're all in these terrible places. Yeah, with Brian De Palma, it's going to feel dark and seedy and dirty and all the things that part of life actually is. Whereas Line just makes it feel like, you know, it's like one step away from a Disney princess movie.
Right, like it's not that bad.
It's not that. I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah.
I would be extremely interested to find a bar where avant-garde dancing would be a popular thing for drunk off-duty steelworkers to be watching.
I was wondering that too.
That seems kind of like, hey, Bill, we just were 12-hour shift at the mill. Let's go down and watch some of avant-garde dancing with some hamburgers and beers. Like, it doesn't really blend when you think about it. That it's very odd, and maybe that's why the movie winds up resonating with audiences. Beside, you know, I mean, obviously it's the style and everything, but maybe there is something where it's like, in a sense, it's a bit ennobling about you know, the blue collar society that in movies is treated a little more dirtily and shabbily and stuff like that. There's a little more of a presumption of class that isn't typically reserved for storylines set in parts of the world like this, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, De Palma would have come at it probably a little more like Coal Miner's Daughter or something.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I will say, in defense a little bit of Line, I feel like when I looked at the other works that he did, it made more sense as well, with having done things like Fatal Attraction and Indecent Proposal, which that one I saw recently for the first time myself, which are a similar style, I feel like, with the cinematography and stuff, especially with like Indecent Proposal, and kind of hit on some of the same topics. Although it's a little bit different background story, it's still got that piece of drama to it.
And actually, so long as we're talking about his other works, he very controversially did what wound up being a very, nonetheless, beautifully made adaptation of Lolita with Jeremy Irons. I'm pretty sure that was Line that did that.
Yeah, it was.
And,
yeah.
And it was...
And he did Unfaithful, too, with Diane Lane. So... Mm-hmm. I mean, he definitely has a type of film.
Yeah, I was like, this is a trend.
Which is overly sexual.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So, and then he did Deep Water. Which is the movie that just came out with on like Hulu with Ben Affleck and Ana de Armas.
So Adrian Lyne did that?
Yes.
I never saw it because,
I haven't seen it either.
I haven't either.
Really?
Huh. Yeah. But again, he seriously has a type of film.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's definitely pigeonholed as a director. So, well, we've talked a little bit about this idea, but I mean, this movie kind of becomes a cultural phenomenon in the sense that the music from the movie, I mean, the sweatshirt from the movie, the dancing. My sister, as a like 4 or 5-year-old, had the Maniac sweatshirt. And it said Maniac on it, you know. Mm-hmm. My sister was a bit of a dancer around the house and a bit of a maniac, so it fit perfectly. But I mean, this movie just kind of became this thing, and it's interesting because the critical reviews for this movie are terrible. It's like in the 30s, mm-hmm. But people just. It almost like a music video, it just caught on and became this thing.
Well, and before we get too far into that too, I wanted to just briefly mention again, I found out just in passing on that episode we did about Book of Boba Fett that neither one of you had seen Jennifer Beal in Flashdance. And that I was, just dropping it like, oh, everyone's seen that. And y'all were both like, no. And I'm going, wait, what? Okay. So we need to go back and adjust your film history and put this in there because it's a classic. So I may be showing my cards, but
I mean, it's, it's shelved. I've seen it.
Yeah.
So, but for me, this was actually something that I had seen once again, in the file of things Christy saw way too young. Although I saw the edited version, edited for TV. I think I even saw it by accident the first time or something like that. And then afterward, it was something that my dad had on and was like, look, but the dancing, it's so artsy. And now as an adult, I'm like, it was not artsy. It is, but I just thought it was really funny that that's how I first got introduced to this movie. And then it's been a classic for me ever since I was young.
And that's cool. I mean, I can assure you that this never would have been in rotation. Like the music, you couldn't escape the music. Right. I know the soundtrack like the back of my hand because like you just couldn't leave it anywhere. It was all over the radio. And it was just constant to the point where I still have that sort of knee jerk. Like when I hear the song Maniac, I'm like, oh no, this song again. Like it was that saturated. And so I think honestly, the soundtrack winds up becoming a huge factor in sort of that feedback loop, because even if people miss it in the theater, but striking while the iron is hot sort of thing, this is right as VHS is showing up. So you hear a soundtrack and then you see it in the video store and you go, oh, okay, right. That's the one that song is from. I might as well catch it. So like that creates that beautiful marketing feedback loop that you can't escape from. And so that I think contributes to it as well, because 83, it's going to hit video in 84. That's just right in time for home purchase and the rise of more, ubiquitous video rental shops everywhere and stuff like that. Kids are going to get their video card. Their folks are going to go out. They're going to be like, yeah, we can rent Footloose. We don't have to go back in the weird room to get this one. We can watch this. Mm-hmm. And then, that sort of thing. So
you mean they could go and rent
Flashdance?
Oh
gosh, why do I keep saying Footloose?
I mean, because they're so
why
similar
do I keep
films,
saying that?
Except for the nudity
movies.
stuff.
It's not even registering in my brain. I'm so sorry. Like seriously, it's just like lodged in there. So oh my goodness, I can't help it.
It's like it sort of how you're joking, John. Like Showgirls was out on the shelf, not in the weird back room too.
Yeah, although that's a movie that I can. Okay. So long as you bring up Showgirls, because this was on my brain the entire time I was watching. I never
thought that would be a sentence I would hear.
Right. Okay.
Since you brought up Showgirls.
Since you brought up Showgirls, first off, Showgirls, there was like the R-rated version that Blockbuster rented. It didn't rent the NC-17 version.
Yeah.
But Showgirls is essentially the same movie in a lot of ways. And they're both written by Joe Esterhaus, who was both a blessing and a blight on Hollywood for many years. Mm-hmm. And what is really interesting is the parallels between the two of them. I at least got through this movie, though. I at least watched it from beginning to end. Showgirls is a movie where I've never in my entire life been able to watch more than like 7 to 9 minutes of it. And I'm like, I just can't take this. And I mean, I watch Neil Breen movies. I've watched Miami Connection so much, I have the soundtrack on Spotify saved so that I can listen to it every so often. I have a Star Trek V poster on the wall behind me right now. I'm gesturing toward it. But Showgirls, I just can't even get through. And I think that at least speaks to the fact that Line as a director and the producers, because you have not just Simpson Bruckheimer, but you have Goober and Peters, who 6 years later unleashed Batman upon the world. They obviously have enough control over the material that I think it would be a very interesting experiment for somebody to take, these are both Esterhaus scripts, essentially, watch Flashdance and watch Showgirls and see the difference between a director who is, a bit more restrained and a little bit more focused and a little bit more under control, because he's just coming up and everything, and then Verhoeven, who's just given carte blanche, and you can just see how script ideas can just go horribly wrong, depending on whose hands they're in.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that. Sorry,
I'm interested to hear, just for you guys, because we've talked a little bit about the idea that the movie does have that very 80s feel, in the sense that it's montagey, it feels like a music video. So what did you feel about the actual story that the movie is telling, which is, you've got this woman who's working as a construction worker and a welder by day and a dancer by night at this very interesting bar where avant-garde dancing, like you said, John, is very popular with the blue-collar crowd, which seems interesting. I'm surprised that's the case. I don't know, anyway, just never thought that would be possible. But this movie proved me wrong. And then her dream is to be a professional dancer, whether or not that actually means ballet or just a dancer in general. But the academy she wants to be at definitely looks like a ballet school. I don't know. What did you guys think?
John?
No, I cede the floor. I cede the floor to you, Christy.
So, honestly, that was my favorite thing about this movie, is that I feel like the bottom line of it is it's a story about having hope, that no matter where you come from, dance doesn't have to be something that you had to be born rich to do. That, she proves that somebody who's a nobody with no money and no formal training, could come in and just have natural talent and get an audition and then actually get accepted, which I thought was a really beautiful thing. And I love the way that hope combines with the song What a Feeling, because it just has this crescendo then in the end for me every time. And that's why I keep rewatching this movie, is because they show that, although it is kind of weird, I guess, thinking without any bias about the kind of dancing they're doing at Ma B's bar, they're showing that there is a difference between how her friend Jeannie for a while goes to the strip club where she's, or I guess I would say nude bar, and is just laying on a table, versus these women who are actually really putting some talent into something, and they come up with costumes and choreography and lighting, and it's not just a job, and so I had more respect for them because of that. And that, I like how her boss questions her about it, and she's like, girls got to make a living. I'm 18 and I live on my own, so what else am I going to do when I don't know, have like a degree or a formal skill other than welding and dancing?
Yes, I see everything you're saying there. And that's definitely in there. I think the movie, story-wise, is an early script, and I think that the music video structure helps it a great deal, because it does allow them to operate like a musical, and I think that's the frame of mind you have to be in to watch it. It's a musical. You have production number, scene, and that's how it's going to flow. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand that those production numbers are going to take shortcuts to hit the gas pedal to tell as much of the story as possible in a very brief period of time. You have the big showstopper, music track that brings the house down, and then intermission, and everybody comes back and resets and stuff like that. And then you have the finale sort of thing. I think that the that is basically that helps it because there are so many ideas that are not fully realized with these characters. There are these interesting sketches of supporting characters that are there. And I think that, you know, we go back to other directors. I think Footloose doesn't wind up, Flashdance doesn't wind up becoming the big hit that it is.
That in, by the way.
Don't
just
you,
FYI.
Whatever, who cares? I'm in, you know, I can't shake it. I don't know why. I'm going to write it down on a piece of paper here right now. Hold on. Flashdance.
It's a weird word, I know.
Yeah.
Flashdance.
Flashdance. Anyway.
Which is weird that it has nothing to do with the Flash. Anyway, but.
Well, you know, it is one of those things, though, where I think that other directors would have turned this into a 2-hour, 10-minute, more serious film, and it would have done its business, and people would have liked it, and then it would have gone away. It wouldn't have become the cultural phenomenon. But at the same time, I think that there are definitely shortcomings where they gloss over some of those shortcomings with the production numbers, which again musicals do too. And I think that one of the biggest things that works in everything's favor is that Jennifer Beals is just super charismatic. I mean, lightning in a bottle casting with her. This movie doesn't work without her, period. Like, she is the definition of linchpin performance and actress. This movie does not work at all. Even looking at the montage, even looking at the production numbers, the dancing, all of the music, all of that type of stuff. Man, they lucked out when they found her, because this was the only casting that was going to work. They needed her or somebody exactly like her for this to work.
And I just found out today, by the way, at the same time that this was going on, she was finishing her degree at Yale in American literature.
Wow, that's...
So the woman is not a one-trick pony. She's got a backup plan. She has a degree from Yale in American literature.
That's just the idea that you're in this Hollywood production while you're going to school for something, like, wow, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing.
It is. It's really interesting. I mean, this is definitely an 80s movie, because this is a movie about things that would never happen, but we're going to pretend like they could happen. You know, I know,
she lives in a factory.
Yeah. I know ballerinas and what it takes to be one, and it's something that you legitimately have to start from very early, and you know there are the chance of this actually happening, or I feel like there's like 1 in a million. You know, there are people where this kind of stuff happens, but it's so small that so it just feels like a lot of the 80s movies in which, you know, those type of things happen, even though, interestingly enough, Christy, you had mentioned in our outline, this is actually based off a real life experience. So, you know, I had no clue that was the case, because that was again, that's where it's like this stuff that happens so rarely. Well, it makes sense that it would inspire a movie.
But she didn't necessarily go on to become a ballet dancer professionally or anything. It was just the fact that it was based on a real woman who was a welder by day and a dancer at night.
Ah, I see what you're saying.
That's where it stopped.
Okay. Well, and so, you know, I mean, again, it's like, it's all of these kind of impossible, like Rocky is the same type of thing. Like, it's the impossible story of the person who shouldn't be able to be the national, you know, heavyweight champion, and yet becomes the heavyweight champion beyond all odds, right? So
not in the first one, though.
Well, that's true, but in the second one, and as we move forward, so in that, it really fits the genre that we're going for in the 80s. And I think in the 80s too, there's this sense of like hope that lots of things are possible that we hadn't felt like were possible, especially in the malaise of the 70s. And by this point, we're starting to come out of that, and these type of movies, I think, make a lot more sense. And so, the story itself, John, I think, to me, you did a good job of kind of hinting at a lot of the things that just become, I would say, the reason this movie has like a 36% of Rotten Tomatoes, which is the storyline is very thin, especially with the supporting characters, and there's just not enough time invested in the movie in that sense. We're more worried about the dance numbers and everything than we are everything else. So you get these characters that are on the side where it's like, we kind of spend just a little bit of time with them and then it doesn't really go anywhere. And there's no real necessarily good resolution to any one of their stories other than Alex's, which, makes sense. So I can totally understand why, I would probably, a certain group would have responded to this movie when it first came out, and then it kind of just becomes this cult classic thing. But, coming to it now, for me, like it just doesn't hold a lot of weight, because the movie is just weightless when it comes to, like, I think, story.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I definitely would agree with that. I think, obviously, there is some seeing it with rose-colored glasses for me. And that it does have a weak spot when it comes to doing any of the character study. And that's something that really could have given it a lot more. Because I do think you have some interesting beginnings of story for Jeannie and Richie in particular. Especially with Jeannie, they even get into the fact that she is trying to go back to becoming a figure skater after being out of it for a while, and that's really hard. And it really hits home, I think, when she says there isn't going to be a second chance for her. This was it. So I do wish that they had gotten to spend more time with her.
Yeah. What's interesting is we can sit here and I think rightly sort of peck at the shortcomings there with the story, because I think they are real. They do exist. But time is a funny thing. People understand Flashdance. Matt and I had never seen it, but we knew of it, and we understood the references, and we knew, and so when it came up, it's like, oh yeah, no, maybe we should see that sort of thing. Whereas, Terms of Endearment, Academy Award winner number 2 that year, pretty much forgotten in the sands of time and stuff like that. So in a sense, you have that eternal question with a movie of how are you going to, like, you can't pick and choose what's going to be the remembered work, right? And sometimes it winds up being more important to your legacy to be relevant to the time you came out than an all-time classic, right? You can't overthink it, sort of thing. And I think that's really interesting, because even this is one of those ones where it supports that idea that you can't just go by the critical scores on stuff, because critics hated it, but it endures. People still know it. People still know Jennifer Beals' name. I still knew she was in this movie. I still knew music from the soundtrack. I still know that gray sweatshirt, even though I'd never seen it. It's that much of a cultural imprint. And so it's like, it's one of those things where it makes it feel like the snake eating its own tail when you start criticizing a movie like this, because it's like, well, it's stuck around for this long.
It's still stuck in your memory, even though you had never seen it.
Right. Maybe it's more important just to sort of acquiesce that sometimes that stuff that we care about just doesn't matter to people at all.
Well, and when you were saying that, John, in particular about like some things just are relevant because of the time when they came out, it immediately made me think of all the John Hughes movies. I mean, that's immediately people go to, those are quintessential 80s movies. It doesn't mean they're great pieces of film. It's just that he had a particular style. They all came out around the same time and starred a lot of the same people. And it was fully representative of the mainstays of the 80s fashion wise, and then actors and, you know, things going on at that time for teens as well. So it's just something that we always look back and go, oh yeah, 80s movies are represented by things like Pretty in Pink, 16 Candles, and then even the stuff like, oh gosh, what was the other one? And Ferris Bueller. You know, they were all very similar. And so I think that this is kind of in that same group.
Like Ferris Bueller is in the National Film Registry. That's a recognized, important cultural landmark film. Like it's important to history. It's preserved. It's like Star Wars or American Graffiti or Jaws or Citizen Kane or The Godfather. Right. And I don't think Flashdance is in that.
It is
category.
Not.
Okay.
It is not. I did some research and it is not a part of the National Film Registry at the moment. You know, it could be. Maybe one day. Who knows?
I wonder, would it be? Should it be?
I think that's a question we'll answer with our ratings.
Yeah.
Probably so.
You know.
But, I did want to add, and maybe I said it wrong. I feel like this could be grouped along with those as quintessential 80s movies to me.
I gotcha.
But yeah, not that they're like similar movies, I guess.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, like, when it comes to the idea, and I think you're right, Christy, in the sense of, like, if you wanted a sense of what the movies of the 80s were like, you know, you might recommend something like Flashdance and Rocky IV and, any of the John Hughes films to get a sense of some of the biggest trends in filmmaking and the things that kind of spurred I mean, we talked about this at the beginning, right? This movie puts Simpson and Bruckheimer on the map, and it also puts a type of filmmaking on the map so that we do get things like Footloose, Purple Rain, Top Gun, Rocky IV. All of these things follow in many ways this type of structure, which, you can either do better or worse than this as a template. And, I would say some of those movies took this template and ran with it and made much more of it than necessarily this does. And I think that's kind of what we're saying just when it comes to like some of the deficiencies we see in the storytelling.
But if you want to be a cheeky jerk like me, you could say that this movie led to Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Because, hear me out here, this puts Jerry Bruckheimer and Don Simpson on the map. Don Simpson dies of a heart attack earlier than Bruckheimer. Bruckheimer's still with us. Bruckheimer goes on producing. Bruckheimer discovers Michael Bay, brings Michael Bay up. We get the Michael Bay movies, and that's sort of like the next generation of the 80s movies sort of thing, the way they put everything together. Michael Bay winds up directing Armageddon, written by J.J. Abrams, which puts him on a career path that takes him all the way to Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. So in a sense, the Star Wars saga is changed forever by Footloose, which came out the same year as Return of the Jedi.
You mean Flashdance?
Damn it! I did it again? Oh my God! Why? Oh!
And you said it with such conviction, which made it even better.
Jeez Louise.
But I see what you're saying. It's 6 degrees of J.J. Abrams, right?
Yeah.
Or
Jerry Bruckheimer.
Yeah.
So,
I can't get
John, you mentioned earlier, and don't worry, man, it happens to all of us, and it's going to be funny for the listeners. But
yeah, I hope so.
So the cast here, you talked about the fact that this movie hinges on whether or not we enjoy Jennifer Beals, and I think you're 100% right in the fact that she's the thing that makes this movie, I would say, watchable. In that you're enjoying what she's doing, and she's just so effervescent in the role, and so full of life, and she plays it at like just her devil may care attitude. is perfect for this role of a woman who is trying to find their way in the world. I mean, she's just a simple girl trying to find her way in the universe. And, you know, she's got no one. And she's doing everything she can to make it. And not just make it. She's not just trying to make it, but she's trying to live.
Yeah,
right?
She has a dream.
To truly live.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you both. I do think that this doesn't work without her. I do have one funny critique, and I feel like it's one of those things where once I tell you, then you won't unsee it. But I don't know if either of you are going to immediately go rewatch Flashdance again right now. But maybe, I don't know. The one thing that really bothered me about her performance, everything else I thought was fantastic. But the first time that she kisses the guy, it is weird. It just feels too aggressive. Like it doesn't feel natural at all to me. And every time I see that kiss, it bothers me.
I can't say that I remember it.
Yeah, I'm trying to recall it. Was it in her apartment after she put on the sweatshirt?
Yep.
Okay. All right. I know that. I got it in my head now. All right.
It was like someone that's never kissed somebody before. I was just like, what the heck is that?
I got more hung up on the fact that later when she throws the rock through his window, you know, of course we find out that, you know, spoilers for a movie that's 40 years old, but we find out he wasn't, you know, going astray or anything like that. But the implication, she throws the rock, the light comes on, he comes running out. The implication really is that he was sleeping with his shoes and his slacks on, and only his button-down shirt was off. And I'm like, well, that doesn't seem comfortable. I mean,
he had time to like slide his shoes on. You know, they're just slide.
Oh, they were loafers.
So,
they were loafers.
Yeah, they're just real easy to get back on. That'll
save you a very valuable 5-6 seconds. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, he was real tired from the evening, and you know, he had taken off his shirt and his shoes, and he just kind of lays it on the bed and finds himself asleep, and then a rock through his window, and it's like, what the heck, you know? So,
and he had to special order it.
That's right. But it was still, I mean, I guess by implication, it was special ordered and replaced in 12 hours or less. I mean, that's pretty good service.
It's very quick, super quick.
I'd pay extra for that. I won't lie.
So I do have to ask you then, because other actors that they had considered for the part were such as Pierce Brosnan, Robert De Niro, Richard Gere, Mel Gibson, Tom Hanks, John Travolta. Kevin Costner almost signed for this role because he was struggling as an actor at the time.
Some would say he's still struggling as an actor, but
No, he's not, because he's on Yellowstone, which is fantastic. I'm just
teasing. It's just a joke.
I know.
He can make fun of me for how many times I say Footloose in this episode.
That's true. He can. He can. Can't John get it right? I mean, I know Kevin's listening to the show. Thanks, Kevin.
Yes.
Some of those choices seem interesting.
Like
and
De Niro?
Maybe would have been better.
Right.
And then some of those I just can't understand in the role at all, like De Niro or Tom Hanks or John Travolta. None of them make sense at all.
I would counter that Travolta does make sense, because Travolta was still riding that first wave of heartthrob that he had going on. I think, did Staying Alive come out this year? Because Staying Alive
before this.
Was it before? I want to say Staying Alive. I got to find this out right now. I'm so sorry.
I was looking.
I got to find out if Staying Alive, because Staying Alive, I think, is the one that sort of put him into hibernation for a few years till Look Who's Talking. Yep, same year, 83.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Directed by Sylvester Stallone. Somehow. But Travolta would have made sense. I could completely see a producer saying Travolta, that is sex appeal. He's a known quantity. You know, women want to be with him. Men want to be him. That's, you know, De Niro really seems like a producer putting together a list of like, well, we'll definitely get funding if we get De Niro in the role. You know, like
yeah, that's if Brian De Palma directed this movie.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, never mind that the style does not fit De Niro at all.
No. But see, what I think is interesting is that I think Pierce Brosnan or Richard Gere would have been better in the role, because I think
Than
Michael
Michael?
Nouri, he's okay, but he has no charisma on screen. Like, he just feels like, to me personally, he felt kind of like cardboard in the role.
Oh.
And he's also in Yellowstone, so I mean, I've seen him do things.
He goes on to do, actually did a lot of stuff before this, and then way more in his career after this movie. But I actually thought he was good, and part of the reason that I like him better than at least any of these options is that I think you didn't want someone to overshadow Jennifer, who was a new actress. And
sure, that makes sense.
We said like she made the movie, so I think if you pair her with someone like Travolta, then she does get overshadowed in this.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent point. You're right.
Yeah, it's a great.
You're right.
It's a great
Thank
point.
you.
Yeah.
And I mean, who else would have this chest hair?
Well, Pierce Brosnan definitely would.
Well, that's
So,
true. Okay,
Yes.
so Pierce
He's got
Brosnan,
plenty
I
of
might
it.
have
Yeah.
gone with instead, but
he's definitely got he's a hairy guy. So he's always wearing a sweater. Anyway, you know, I think what's interesting here too is that, you know, when I think of the rest of the cast, everybody else just kind of like fades to the background for me, except for the guy who plays Richie, because he's just so terrible as telling those jokes. And he's the one person where I felt like his storyline could have been so much more interesting if they have just invested a little bit of time.
mm-hmm.
Because, you know, I do think the idea of somebody thinking that, oh, I can go and make it in Hollywood and everything, and not doing so is an interesting story to tell, and realizing everything he really wants is here. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's like the movie could have been 10 minutes longer and had just more of him, and I think it would have been just more rewarding for the audience. So,
and maybe him winning Jeannie back.
yeah, well, and he has the relationship too with Alex, which you can tell they're very close. She's like his sister. He's like her brother. They truly care for one another. It's a sweet relationship. I love all that. It's just, there's just not enough time to truly, I think, develop that in a way that really truly comes across on screen the way it should.
And that's fixed at the script level, because you have to cut the other female character and turn it into some kind of wonderful type of triangle where Richie is pining for Alex, and Alex is in love with the other guy, and Richie loses and has to be okay with it because she's found her true love, sort of thing. And the conflict then becomes, well, you know, Richie can come at her and say, well, you just love him because of what he can do for you. Look, he can get you auditions at these things and everything, and that's something I can't do, and that's the only reason you don't want to have anything to do with me. And that creates a whole lot more drama, and I'm willing to bet that one of those other directors that we mentioned probably would have had a rewrite to the script and gone down that road. So,
yeah, maybe
that's my theory.
Yeah,
and I'm sticking to it.
I also just wanted to add that I thought it was cool, all of the different styles of dance they managed to fit in this movie. It's almost like it's a commentary about what kinds of dance are out there. Because, I mean, they've got her learning how to break dance. They've got, you know, the avant-garde stuff in the bar. They've got ballet. I mean, you know, all the styles are represented.
And of course, since you're such a fan, Matt, are you aware of the breakdancing, the thing with that? Because Beals had body doubles dance for her in certain things.
Yes.
And in the breakdancing, at the end, it was actually a male breakdancer
called
dressed
Crazy
up.
Legs.
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
I thought
I knew that
was...
going in. I knew that going in. And so I was watching for it. And if you watch for it, you're like, oh, yeah, okay, that's not her.
Those are male thighs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The look and the feel of this movie was really interesting. And, the fact that she doesn't do the dancing is it just kind of like, okay, that explains a lot of things about this film. Maybe I don't know. This movie also needs a seizure warning for the avant-garde dance in the bar where the light keeps flashing. And like, I legitimately couldn't watch that scene because it's so... I just couldn't. I'm like, I'm going to have a seizure watching
You're staring at a strobe light. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is... I mean, today you would be able to do face replacement and everything like that to help and all. But yeah, I mean, it was just kind of strange to realize that so much of what happens on screen, she's not even doing. Not that Jennifer wasn't in shape and all those type of things. She was absolutely in incredible shape for this movie, but it's just kind of weird.
But that's just sort of normal for movies. Up to like,
it's true.
You can call it the Tom Cruise effect, where we've now been spoiled to the point where it's like, oh, my movie star is flying an airplane. I guess they know how to fly an airplane now. Whereas back then, body doubles and singing doubles and stuff like that, it was like, yeah, that's just what you did.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
Audrey Hepburn doesn't sing in My Fair Lady, so yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Milli Vanilli didn't sing at all, and they had 3 Billboard hits. So there you go.
Nice.
Well, obviously, I think the biggest thing that comes from this movie, and John, you mentioned this earlier, is really just the soundtrack becomes this. It does become a phenomenon that lives in perpetuity now. I mean, it's something to which has continued to live on. And so, is it something that you guys, especially all these years later, do you still listen to at this point when those songs come on? Do you're like, oh yeah, that song? Or is it more like, oh yeah, that song?
Well, I think you know what my answer is.
I think I tipped my hand earlier.
John and I are two different ends of the spectrum here. I'm like, yeah, and he's like, oh god, not again.
I remember distinctly Return of the Jedi was my thing even back then, and all of these girls were going around listening to Maniac, and I was like, no, leave me alone. Luke's lightsaber is green now. Like that's just who I was. And
you were walking around singing the Ewok song.
Yes, I was actually.
Yep, nub.
Listen, the Bantha tracks after Return of the Jedi had a glossary of Ewok-ese. And so, yes, I did learn all of the Ewok words in the in the finale. So, yes. You know what? I mean, the songs are, 80s songs sort of thing. They're not good or bad to me. They're 80s songs, and they were popular, and it's like they're not frequent rotation for me by any stretch. I mean, I think Giorgio Moroder, I love his work. He did a lot of great stuff in the 80s. But, I mean, I hate to play like the comparison game sort of thing, but like throw this soundtrack up against Rocky IV or Top Gun or Footloose, which apparently I can't get out of my brain. Those are soundtracks that I will, those songs will come on in fairly frequent rotation through the year, where it's like,
and
you
dance.
Yeah. Well, with the doors closed and the drapes drawn. Yes. But yes.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to scare the neighbors.
Yeah.
Well, no, they got to pay if they want to see skills like that. Come on.
But I mean, yeah, like definitely if you compare it to something like Top Gun, I mean, I don't think it holds up the same way with the music to me as Top Gun does. But I still think it's fun. And I mean, definitely the 2 title songs that got the most awards and everything, Maniac and What a Feeling, are still things that I love. And, remind me of happy things, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
I will say of all of the movies, What a Feeling, that's the one. Like that, if that comes on, I'm not changing the station or the channel or anything like that. It's like, okay, I really like this one.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. Like, I think that song is super catchy. I think I have to be more in the mood for Maniac, for sure. But I mean, it's fascinating to me that I guess this still happens in films, but it just feels like so many of those 80s movies, the music was so indelible. And it even still is today. You mentioned earlier, Armageddon. And man, I remember when that movie came out and it was the Aerosmith song. And I remember being on a trip and like we listened to that song 4,200 times on the way from Texas to Colorado and back again. Because it was the song, right? Yeah. But there are very few movies I feel like that I remember the music as much as I do from those films from the 80s. For me, I mean, there are a few again from the 90s, like a Armageddon, or I do think Batman Forever, or something of that nature, but it's just not as like almost like reach for it kind of thing as much as those 80s songs are. And so I think that's one of the things that makes a movie like this have staying power. It's almost just like people have the nostalgia for the music in it as much as they do the film itself, which I think Top Gun is a perfect example of that, where it's just like that movie is so represented by the music that plays in it, like a Footloose, that you just can't get away from it. And then you hear that song, Danger Zone, thinking of the movie,
Danger Zone.
Yeah. Danger Zone.
But like, even though Maniac, I would say usually is more of a joke at this point than What a Feeling, it is that thing that just continues to get stuck in people's head. And like, I mean, I was plaguing Matt with different TikTok videos of people doing, like
she was
dancing in the rain to Maniac on TikTok.
Wow.
And this is recent. TikTok ain't been around that long.
That is something else. I think we need to start a trend and get people to dance to some of the stuff that came about in other movies too. Let's subvert the trend. Let's subvert the trend.
And that's the thing that I think is so cool about this movie too, is like that first dance that you actually see is so famous now. It's been repeated over and over and over again. The scene where she pulls the cord and the water splashes. And like, that was another thing I was spamming that with, was the Deadpool poster of him being covered in shells.
And I personally like the Garza Fwip one that they did with her as a Twi'lek much better. I think that was classic. So
exactly.
Well, we have talked, which I am surprised, for almost an hour here about Flashdance, and so I can't wait to see what our ratings are going to be. So we'll start with you, John. What is your rating for Flashdance?
I feel like I can't look in Christy's direction when I say this.
Be honest, it's okay.
It's a 1-star movie. I'm sorry. It's a 1 star. 1 star. This movie's terrible. It's just not good.
Oh,
I understand and respect everything that you said. I respect you. I know why it's important. We all have movies like this where the other person, just for whatever reason, I let's put it this way. As soon as I saw Joe Esterhouse's name, my reaction was, uh-oh. I literally said the word, uh-oh. while I was watching the movie and I saw Esterhouse's name, I was like, oh boy.
Because you thought of Showgirls, right?
I thought of all of Esterhouse's movies. And I just got to say, I just didn't care for this at all. I think that Jennifer Beals is great. I think she's wonderful. I think she's too good for this movie. Like, I do. I think she's the whole reason to watch it. And that's the only reason it gets a star.
Not the dancing?
No, not the dancing. Not the dancing. I got to go with the one. I'm so sorry. I feel bad that I rated it that way, but I got to be honest.
Not 2 for Jennifer? I mean, geez.
She got the 1. So there you go.
Nobody died. That's the 1, remember?
No, that was, well, the thing is, that was half a star. And I had to retire that one. I'll tell you the story. Yeah. So. Yeah.
All right, I'll let it go.
That's my story.
What
and I'm
about
sticking
you,
to
Christy? Because I am actually fascinated to see where you end up with this movie. Because I feel like, and I think John can agree with this, I feel like you've been very honest with the way in which this movie does have some deficiencies. And so I am just kind of wondering where you end up falling with the film.
So I think that there's 2 different ways to look at this. I think for one, if you look at it purely from nostalgia, then obviously my rating is higher than it would be just looking at it critically. And I think that's the 2 big things you see with this when you look it up in Wikipedia. Like you said, Matt, the critical reviews are that it's one of Roger Ebert's most hated movies of all time, which I don't understand. But the popular reviews were that it was the 3rd highest grossing film of the year for 1983. So there's clearly a disparity there of 2 completely different groups of people. And that's kind of how I feel internally about it as well. Like if I look at it as what type of film is it compared to other great film out there? Yeah, it's not like the greatest film I've ever seen or, piece of script writing I've ever seen. But I think that it has a lot of heart to it. And obviously I saw it at a good time in my life where I kind of saw myself some in the characteristics that you see in the title character. Of like, not coming from a lot, but trying to make it somewhere, So I think that I rate it a little bit higher just because I love it and because it gives me that feeling of hope every time I watch it, and I watch it a lot. I give it a 3 out of 5 because I think it still has a lot of good to it, even if it's not, like a Casablanca.
A Casablanca, it is not.
I know.
Would be my favorite movie of all time. But, it was interesting as we were talking about the film because for me, when I first went and rated this on Letterboxd after watching it, I had given this a 2.5. But after our conversation, it did go down to a 2. So I'm the stepping stone between both of you. It's one of those things where I think that when I look at it through a very critical lens, yeah, it's not a very good movie, but that there is this thing to which is hard to explain, but it's stayed with people, right? And it's become a movie which people can reference without even, and necessarily having seen it. I was thinking of other movies like this, and I was thinking of one that kind of came out when I was younger, but has become like this, I think, which is like Starship Troopers. It's not a great movie, but like so many people have like seen it and you can reference it and people kind of know it. And it's just this like weird kind of cult hit movie that just became something that people know, right? Like, John, you also mentioned a movie that it's not good, but you can make jokes about it and everybody knows it is Showgirls, right? Like, so, and yeah, this, I don't think this is a great movie, but I can 100% understand why people at the time responded to it and that it just became something that took on a life of its own. And part of that has to do with the fact that I think the way that, as we mentioned, music and a movie can kind of just transcend everything else. And so, yeah, I mean, is this my favorite movie? Of course not. Am I glad that I kind of checked off that 80s movie box of a movie I hadn't seen yet? Absolutely. And so now it's time of the show where we do some recommendations. And so, Christy, what would you like to recommend to everybody this week?
Well, I have a doozy of a thing to recommend this week, and it's going to crack you up if anyone actually dares to look it up. My husband and I, for whatever reason, have really gotten into musical comedians, is how I'm going to say it. So there's these guys on YouTube that do comedy, but it's also set to music. And he introduced me to a guy named Tom Cardy, Cardy. FYI, it's not kid friendly, but it's hilarious. He is an Australian with a very large mustache who does stupid songs about stupid things, and it's just really funny. So yeah, I recommend checking out Tom Cardy. And if you want something else similar, my personal favorite, a little bit more than him, is I think you pronounce it Mark Rebillet, Rebillet. He's French, and he is a DJ that does a similar kind of thing. So, yeah, musical comedians.
Nice,
cool,
nice.
Cool.
What about you, John?
I could take the easy way out and say Top Gun Maverick, because I saw that the day after Flashdance, and boy, was that a palate cleanser, because that's a great film. I highly recommend it for anybody to go catch it. Definitely a big screen experience. But there was another movie that I revisited recently, and I want to toss it out there if anybody hasn't seen it. If you want to see something that's fascinating as a similar in intent as being an ode to the works of the past, would be to check out John Milius's Conan the Barbarian from 1982. It was restored, sort of, I think, not too long ago.
Is this the one with Schwarzenegger?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But it is it's a pretty fun movie to watch and pretty interesting, and a really great, I think, sort of a counterpoint to, sort of Milius comes up at the same time as Spielberg and Lucas and De Palma and Scorsese and all of that, but he definitely had his own style, and he's doing his own homage to the past here. And I think that Conan the Barbarian from 1982 is definitely a really interesting one to check out. Is it great cinema? That's for you to decide, but it is I think it retains a ton of fun. Don't watch Conan the Destroyer. Whatever you do, don't ever watch that movie.
Maybe Red Sonja.
Yeah.
Or Sheena.
I'll watch Flashdance 1,000 times before I watch Conan the Destroyer, but Conan the Barbarian remains a sentimental favorite. So check that out.
I'm going to back up John here, because as this show comes out, you probably have one more day to go see Top Gun Maverick in the large screen cinemas, because the next day Jurassic World Dominion is going to release, and Top Gun Maverick deserves to be seen on the biggest screen you can possibly see it in.
Okay, I'll go.
See it in an IMAX theater, because you get the full effect. And, I went back and I was rewatching a bunch of Star Wars movies, and the movie that Top Gun Maverick reminded me of was Solo, A Star Wars Story, where I just had a big goofy grin on my face the entire film. I couldn't stop smiling because it was just so good. So I'm going to recommend you go and watch Solo, A Star Wars Story. And I'm going to recommend you do it on Disney Plus, so they realize Solo, A Star Wars Story, yeah, it's a movie that people want to see more of. So go do that. And maybe we'll get more, Solo 2 action. So
here.
Make Solo 2 happen.
Yeah. Yes.
I wish.
Well, John, If people do want to catch up with you and see what other bad recommendations like Conan the Barbarian you have, where can people find you?
Bro, seriously?
Wow.
That's hurtful. I don't know what you're talking about here. I saw you making your face and everything like that.
I was, because it's not a good movie.
Oh, completely disagree. Completely disagree. Conan the Barbarian. Come on. Anyway.
Well, we'll let the listeners decide. So
they already have. Everybody agrees with me. And they can agree with me online. I'm Kessel Junkie, KESSELJUNKIE. Go find me wherever I am. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party co-hosting two shows. One of them is called House Lights, where we look at
Flashdance.
I was actually going to make a Footloose joke, but it's even funnier that you dropped Flashdance trying to say Footloose after I was saying Footloose to try to say Flashdance.
That was the joke.
I'm so confused. And the other one that I co-host is called Aggressive Negotiations, which is a Star Wars podcast that I co-host with Matt over there on the Nerd Party.
Which I just want to plug, like you guys walk through all the John Hughes films, you know, so, and we talked a lot about those. So if you do want to hear that, I would definitely recommend House Lights. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you. Yes. I don't even know.
And Christy, when people aren't trying to figure out what the heck we're talking about now, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Bespin Bell. And then when I'm not here, I do a show, or I did a show. I guess I should probably do it again to say that I still do it. Sabers and Spells on the Skywalking Through Neverland Network, Skynet, with my friends Amanda and Teresa. But that's it.
Well, you can also, find me all over the place on social media under the name MattRushing02. And so Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero, any of those places, I'd love it if you'd follow me and let me know what you think of the show and where I'm wrong, because, that's really, let's be honest, that's what Twitter is for, and social media is just to tell people how they're wrong. And you can also find me here on the network doing a lot of shows. John and I do a couple bonus shows here in the 602 Club feed with Assembling Avengers and Snyder Cuts. Both will be back because Snyder has new movies coming out, and we were even talking today, actually, as before we recorded. We are going to be back with Assembling Avengers sooner rather than later. It's a very busy summer for us, though, so please just let us have a little bit of break before we dive into the never-ending Phase 4. You can also find me here doing a lot of different shows. So I've got The Orb, Literary Treks, Warp 5, Saddle Up, and The Artificial Tango. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. Saddle Up is about Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And The Artificial Tango is about Star Trek Picard. And then when I wasn't doing Aggressive Negotiations on the Nerd Party Network with John Mills, I was doing a completed show with Drea Kaufman called Owl Post. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But thank you so much for joining us.
And go be a maniac, you hear?